Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be focusing on the alocasia in my collection, which is very exciting because I feel like I haven't really highlighted them in a long time. So if you didn't know, or if you're new to this channel, over the last few months I've been trying to get through every genus in my collection. I did do last year like an entire collection video, but I wanted to focus on every genus specifically, showing you each one that I have in my collection, taking your questions, and doing a little bit of a Q&A, and then also talking about some plants in that genus that are either on my collection or ones that I just kind of want to put on your radar. So I did that with my anthurium, I did that with my philodendron, my ripsalis, and now we are here with alocasias. I think the only one left that I really need to do is just kind of my miscellaneous ones, because I don't have enough other plant and other genus to do its own video, but we will do a miscellaneous plant video on its own. But anyway, today's video should be shorter, hopefully, than the other ones because I only have 6 alocasia, and I will talk a little bit later about why I do not have as many as I used to. I think at the peak of my alocasia collecting, I probably had upward of maybe 15 different kinds of alocasia, but yeah, I've definitely pared it down over the last year. So anyways, I'm going to follow the format that I did for the other videos, so we're just gonna start by going through each of the alocasia that I have. Of course, I had to start with my big beauty, the alocasia scalprum. This one has been just a joy. It's just been a joy to have. I knew that when I first acquired it that it was going to be a very, very special addition to the plant family. I just didn't know how enjoyable it would be to grow, mostly because I went into it with a lot of hesitation. I'm not gonna say fear, but I kind of looked at this plant and thought, oh, it's probably super finicky. I probably have to give that thing really high humidity and like the perfect temps, and it might have to even go in my tent or an exo or something. But she has proven me wrong on every turn and has just proven that she'll just like live no matter what. She's been through thrips, she's been through spider mites, she's been through root rot, multiple repottings, and she continues to be probably one of the nicest looking alocasia in my collection. Whenever somebody asks like, what alocasia do you recommend, I always say the scalprum, not just because I'm biased to the way it looks, like I just favor the way it looks over pretty much any alocasia out there, but in terms of care, it's so much easier than any alocasia I've ever owned, and it doesn't really follow those same, I guess, characteristics of alocasia that you know of, where they have crazy long petioles, sometimes they droop, they yellow, they only hold on to like one leaf at a time. I do think that alocasia growing is like a special science, and it's something that you have to learn to do well. But the scalprum is not one of those. I really cannot take credit for how this looks. And I don't know if that's everyone's experience or if I just have like a really good specimen, but I've never had issues with this thing. I think the most frustrated I've ever gotten with the scalprum is there was a point in time where it was just pushing flower after flower after flower, and I just was not getting any leaves on it, and I probably didn't have a new leaf on it for close to like 8 months because it pushed like 12 flowers in a row, and I was like, I just want leaves. But you know, she's out of that now. I will say that one interesting thing I've noticed about the scalprum is that it's not like my other alocasia where I notice each leaf has a very small amount of size growth in terms of the leaf size. This one will go from having like the most ginormous, massive leaf to something that's like really tiny or small, like just much smaller. There's no consistency really in the upsizing. It's just kind of, it just shoots out whatever it wants to give you. I don't really mind it though, because up until this point I have been able to just keep it on a shelf and it hasn't really outgrown this space too much. And Yeah, I just am so happy to see any growth at all. I'm really not too hard pressed on having any leaves larger than this. This does it for me. This makes me happy. I am proud of her. I don't expect anything more from this plant than leaves like this. So in this pot, I'm growing it in no drainage. It's just in a tall glass vessel, and I actually prefer to grow my alocasia in deeper vessels rather than like wider vessels. I just find that they do so much better, and I do find that they like to be root bound, but I will talk a little bit about that later. And there's also multiple plants in this one pot, so it just slapped me. I was talking so highly of you and you slapped me. So this is the main growth point right here, this stalk, and it's these 3 big leaves right here. And then the second little growth point, which they grew from corms and I just left them in there, is this one. And then we've got the little baby corm down there. I haven't typically liked growing multiple alocasia in one pot just because I kind of want to focus the root system on nutrients for one plant. I don't really want them to have to share, but it's like really nice having like such a big bushy pot. And so with my other alocasia, I've been more open to potting several in the same pot just to make it look more full, especially because alocasias tend to do the one in, one out thing. Although this one is an exception to that. This one, it does drop leaves, but not as fast as my other alocasia. And in general, just very easygoing. I don't know if it's the use of mycorrhizal inoculants, but it definitely is more resistant, not resistant, it's more, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not resilient, not resistant. It's more resilient through drought periods than my other alocasia. And I don't mean to ever have any drought periods, but it just happens where I forget to water, or it's using more water than like I can keep up with, or just not checking them enough. But I do notice that with this one, when it is like bone dry, like very thirsty, the leaves don't really look super sad. Like, not like my other alocasia where the second it runs out of water, it's like on its deathbed. This one holds its form a lot longer, and it really takes a long drought period to get the leaves to curl. But I do find that once it does get water, as long as you don't have any dry rot, like it's not so dry beyond repair, they bounce back pretty well. So anyway, I wanted to start with this one just because she's just been so good to me. And when I think about like my most prized alocasia in my collection, she for sure is one that comes to mind. Next one on the list is my alocasia melo. This one is one of the newer ones. Well, not newer. I got this one probably in September of last year. I used to have another melo, but that one, it didn't like me very much. It would just yellow, always keep one leaf, and I just don't think it was me and her, we didn't get along. So I just got rid of it, and I got a second melo that was a little bit more mature, had its bearings, had a good root system, and it was in soil. I did do a pond conversion, and it actually took to it very well, which is extremely surprising, and again, we will talk about that later. Anyway, the melo has been also another favorite of mine. I think when I think of an alocasia that I really love, I think I definitely tend to lean towards the one that have very, not like animal-like skin, because like that one is very reptilian, right? And this one is like rhino skin. They say it's like a, yeah, rhino skin texture. Not that I know what a rhino feels like, but I just like the really textural anthurium. This is not an anthurium. Knock knock, who's there? I like the textural alocasia. I just feel like it looks so otherworldly and just not real, and it's just amazing. So this one has been really fun to grow. Definitely having a better experience than my other one. It's been giving me some really nice leaves, but also this one has kind of been a part of the 2-leaf club for a long time. It seems like it doesn't really want to hold on to more than 2 leaves at a time, even though I do tend to fertilize my alocasia a little bit heavier because it has the tendency to drop leaves so often. But I don't mind it, honestly. I don't, like, obviously I love how big and bushy my scalprum is, but I feel like when this has very little leaves, I can just appreciate each of them more rather than having something that's super big. But this one's actually been a pretty fast grower in comparison to the growth on some of my other alocasia. Even though it does the 1 in, 1 out quite frequently, I'm also getting leaves very frequently. Like right now, I can kind of see that it's starting to push something from the cataphyll, and this one only fully like opened and hardened maybe like a week and a half ago. So we'll see if this one hangs on. She's still looking pretty good. Hopefully we can keep 3 leaves this time. I don't know if it's something that comes with maturity, but yeah, I just love the melo. So it's very similar to the Maharani, and I'm trying to remember kind of the differences between them. I did own a Maharani at one point, but once I owned the melo, I just felt like I liked this one more. And because they're so similar, I didn't feel the need to have both of them. I am going to insert a picture of the melo here. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna insert a Maharani. I feel like I'll stand over here. I feel like the Maharani has a little bit more of a bluish, purplish tone to it, like a purplish color, whereas this one's a little bit more on the green side. I think the Maharani has a purple back. If I'm remembering correctly, I think the Maharani is a black velvet hybrid. Am I wrong? Maybe. One of them, I think one of them is a black velvet hybrid, which is why it has that abaxial color, whereas this one is just like a light green. But anyway, if you're into the textural kind of alocasia and you're looking for one that's not insanely difficult, maybe give this one a try. I have been growing this one in my exo since I've had it. I grew the other one that I had that I chucked out in ambient conditions. I did have it in a greenhouse for a little bit, but it really wasn't acting any different, so I took it out. But definitely having a much better time with this one, and I hope that I can keep it up because I do really, really like this alocasia, and I would love to nurture it into maturity and just see how big it can get. But yeah, just like the scalprum, very, very thick leaves. Beautiful, amazing texture on it, and just like look at that intricate pattern. It's just crazy. It's wild. I love this plant so much. So anyway, yeah, alocasia melo, not as easy as the scalprum, but also not the most finicky alocasia in the world. Also, I'm sure that you saw it obviously on camera, but I forgot to tell you, also growing the melo in no drainage in Lechu's pond. Actually, I should be growing all of my alocasia in no drainage because I am just convinced that alocasia do so much better in no drainage than with drainage. And yes, that's my opinion. Next, we are going into frydek land, and unfortunately, the timing with this video is kind of in a time where my frydek is going through it a little bit. So I did almost just behead this thing. Actually, okay, let's go back. Well, let's show it to you first. This is leaf number 1. She is really, really tiny. She used to be so much bigger. And this is the one that just came out, which is beautiful, gorgina, amazing, incredible, spectacular. So it's been a journey. I know that you guys can't see anything right now, but this is very heavy. Maybe I can angle this down. There we go. So it has been a journey with this alocasia frydek. I grew this from a corm starting in 2022, I believe. It has not been the easiest alocasia. Definitely experienced the 1 in, 1 out thing with the frydek. I was having a hard time keeping more than like 2 leaves on it. And it wasn't really until I started growing in a larger no drainage vessel in pond and was fertilizing more heavily that I was able to keep more leaves on the frydek. So I'm gonna show you what it kind of looked like at its peak when it was just so magnificent and beautiful, and it was holding on to so many leaves, and the leaves were sizing up so nicely. But unfortunately, alocasia, if you didn't know, they are very prone to spider mites. A lot of the alocasia that you'll get at big box stores will have spider mites, and this is no exception. I feel like I've always pretty much had spider mites on this plant since I've owned it. It's been like an on again, off again thing. We just always go through these periods where it's just like infested with spider mites, and then it'll go away, then it's infested again, and then it'll go away. So with that kind of happening in the background, another thing that happened with this one is it just went full white, and I only got leaves that were like this color without the variegation, and I was close to throwing it out. I honestly, like, I harvested the corms. I was like, I'm just gonna start over because I've gotten like 6 leaves in a row now where it's white, and even with silica, it wasn't holding onto the leaves, and it just looked like this brown mess. But luckily, she came back. Variegation fully came back, obviously, and I'm so glad that I stuck it through because it's been a long journey for us. So that happened, and then it was like it bounced back, it recovered, it was fine. I repotted it, kind of went through a little bit of stress and shock that it came out of that, and then got hit with spider mites again, which is why it looks like this. So that's kind of the journey over the years with this frydek. But I guess I wanted to say all of that because it's just, it hasn't been the same experience that I've had with my scalprum. My scalprum has been very, again, like I said, resilient through pests, resilient through transplanting, repotting, moving out in and out of greenhouses, whereas this one has been a little bit more on the finicky side. I am just glad to see it alive and pushing out new leaves. I'm very grateful for that, but I don't love how spider mite prone this one is. No matter how many times I treat it, no matter what I use on it, it seems like the spider mites always find their way. One difficult thing about the frydek and pests, specifically spider mites, is that because of the way the variegation looks, especially when it's not half moon like this, it can be kind of hard to see the spider mites on it until you see the damage. So sometimes it's a little bit too late to, you know, save it before the leaves start deteriorating. But I think a lesson that I have to keep drilling into my brain is like, this is a plant that I need to check on like weekly. I need to wash it down weekly like I do my other plants that I really love a lot. I just tend to not do that with this one, and I don't know why. I don't intend on ever getting rid of it until it gets rid of me, if that time ever comes. But if someone is asking like what is a recommended alocasia, I probably wouldn't recommend this one just because it requires a little bit more, especially in terms of light, in terms of fertilization, because of the nature of it being variegated. I know some people just have smooth sailing with variegated alocasia, but I've only owned this one. I've never owned any other variegated alocasia, but I think based on my experience with this one, I'm not sure I have a huge desire to own any other variegated alocasia, no matter how beautiful they are. There are so many that I've seen, like the variegated melo, the variegated, even the variegated alocasia poly, like the pink one, variegated scalprum. That one was a little bit underwhelming for me though, to be honest. I much prefer the regular scalprum over the variegated one. But I think this will probably be the only variegated alocasia in my collection unless someone literally pushes one onto me. But I think it's a good one to have because I used to have the alocasia micholitziana, which is the green version. Plug it in here. That is actually one that I would like to try to own again. I just have not had a lot of luck keeping it really happy and healthy. I don't really know what the secret is to keeping many leaves on the micholitziana, nor do I really know how to prevent the edges from going super yellow. After a while, it just became not a good growing experience for me, which is why I no longer have one in my collection. But surprisingly, I've been able to keep my frydek happier than the green version of this. And I don't know what everyone's experience is with this one over the green version, like which one you find to be easier. or more easygoing, but for me, I'm gonna say this one, surprisingly. Anyway, I wish I had more to show you, but this is all she looks like right now. And I'm sorry, I'm holding it so weird, but it's very, very, very heavy. So it's in this huge no drainage vessel because it used to be a lot bigger. Haven't moved it since then. It's living with Leca down at the bottom, perlite heavy pond, and yeah, I could probably take it back down again since the leaves are much smaller, but at the same time, I don't really want to disturb it. So I don't know what the plan is with this one, except trying to keep it spider mite free. I guess that should be my only goal for it at the moment, but it kind of looks like she's on the mend now. I've been loving showing this one lately. She's been getting a lot of time in the spotlight, as she deserves, but except this guy is just not cooperating. I kind of want to maybe, hold on one second. Okay, I have forced him to hang out with his friends over here. I should have done that a long time ago, but anyway, this is my alocasia cuprea. She had a mega glow up in 2023. 2023 was definitely her year, and hopefully I'm not jinxing it into the new year, but look at this new leaf. I can already see she's getting bigger. Like, this leaf looks, I know like it looks very similar, but I can just tell that we are on the cusp. We're on the cusp of these big, beautiful leaves, and I'm so ready for it. But anyway, this is another alocasia that I have grown from a corm. It's one that I really did not enjoy years before I owned it. I thought it was disgusting. I thought it was creepy. I didn't know why anyone liked it until finally the clouds cleared and I saw clearly, and now it's like one of my favorites. Honestly, this has been one of my favorite plants over the last maybe 6 years, 6 months to a year, just because of how well it's grown. And it's growing in ambient conditions right now. It's just living down here with 2 Barina bars, 35% humidity at best, and she's just a trooper. Like, look at how many leaves she's holding on to. There's only 1 plant in here. I did remove 2 of the corms that were sticking out. They were very tiny, but this is one that I only plan to have 1 plant in, just because I think if there's multiple, I might get a bit overwhelmed, since it doesn't have the very droopy hanging leaves like the scalprum where they can fit a little bit better. I'm just imagining, like, if I had 2 of these in 1 pot, I think it would just be kind of insane. The cuprea is one that I've just grown to love, even though it's not a super thick leaf like the scalprum and the melo. It's just, it has like a texture to it that is just so nice. I love the venation on it. It's so alien-like, and it's crazy because it's like the reason why I love it now are all the reasons that I used to hate it. And I remember showing a picture to my husband when I first acquired this plant. I showed him a really mature leaf, and he was like, oh, I don't know if I like that. It's kind of creepy. He was saying it kind of looks like an alien's belly, like if an alien had like a 6-pack or like a 20-pack or something. And I see it. I mean, those are definitely reasons that I was creeped out by it. I also find it to be very like insect beetle-like, in like not a great way, but I don't know, something switched in me, and now I just love it so much. I love the color of it. I just love the contrast of the venation with the color of the leaf. I love the glossiness and the shininess. This emergent leaf is unreal. It's insane. That shine and just the sheen of it. I feel like this lighting is not doing it justice, but it's just beautiful. Also a very subtle thing that is not super noticeable. Maybe it'll be more noticeable in the abaxials, but you can see how it's like, there's like a white outline. It looks so cool. It looks amazing. And you can see it from the front, but it's kind of just like washing it out with the background and the light that I have in front of me. But there's like nothing that I dislike about this plant now. She's just so lovely. And I'm not gonna say that this was super easy. I feel like it definitely took a while to even get to this size. I don't know if it's just because I have kind of kept it in a smaller vessel throughout the years, but she's held on to more leaves in a smaller vessel than a larger one, but I think at the expense of not having massive leaf size jumps between each leaf, because I've seen people that grow the cuprea and their leaves are like 10 times the size of mine and also more bushy, but their pots are huge. But I'm okay with how it's been growing. I'm okay with this growth pattern, how fast or how slow it's been growing. I'm not really in any rush truly to see a leaf that no longer fits down here, because I feel like that was a theme all of last year, was me trying to just fit plants where they no longer can fit, and it's been challenging for sure. And I don't know what will happen with this or where it's gonna go once it outgrows anywhere it can go here, but I'm not gonna think about that. Wherever I can find, I will find a spot for her because she's worth it. And again, like my other alocasia, I'm gonna keep this one around as long as she'll have me, meaning hopefully I don't screw things up. She could definitely use a repot though, because she's getting quite tall, and I do see that the roots are pretty much overtaking this pot. I can see some roots starting to grow upward, which is my sign that it needs a bigger pot. But yeah, this is what she looks like now. I would definitely recommend the cuprea to anyone who asked for alocasia recommendations. She's definitely a fun one to grow. Second to last one is my alocasia heterophylla corazon. I think I'm saying that right. I actually thought for a long time that this was a dragon's breath. I was a lot disappointed when I realized that it wasn't a dragon's breath, but in looking into this one a little bit more, it still is an alocasia that is right up my alley. Really, really silver, narrow leaves, contrasted venation, nice long lobes. I mean, what's there to not love about this one? I have shown, I don't remember which video it is, where I showed the difference between this one and the dragon's breath, but we're going to talk about the dragon's breath in a little bit. But I did grow this one from a corm as well. It's been kind of a slow burn. I'm only now seeing, like, I guess decent size growth in the last, I would say, few weeks. I don't really know what this spotty dottiness is about. I don't know if you can really see it, but there are spots on these leaves, and that's a recent thing. I wish I could tell you what it is, but other than that, it's been pretty okay. I did grow this one in a greenhouse in the first few, I guess, months. Well, no, I've had it for longer than that. I actually don't remember when I got this, but when it was really little, I was still growing it in a greenhouse just because I felt like it required a little bit more humidity. But once it grew a leaf that was like a little smaller than this, I just figured it's time to come out. I don't want to grow this plant in a greenhouse long term. So it's just living right here next to the cuprea. This one also had spider mites for a little bit, but didn't really show a lot of stress from it either. And it's just been like a nice little contrast to the alocasia that I have. Actually, I would say that all of my alocasia are vastly, vastly different. And I think that's why I've been still intrigued by them. They're not so similar that I can't enjoy each of them individually. They all have characteristics that are super different from one another. And I think that's why I was getting kind of tired of the Maharani, because I really liked the melo a lot more and they were so similar that I just kind of neglected it. So I'm trying to, even though there are certain features of different alocasia that I really love, if it's a little bit too close to the ones that I have, I don't really feel the need to own it. I guess a example of that would be the alocasia sinuata. I will insert a photo here. I know this looks nothing like the scalprum, but to me it resembles like a very reptilian looking alocasia, kind of along the same colors, not the same kind of the same texture. They both have like a very glossy feel to it, but I just got tired of that one. I just really flocked to my scalprum, so I got rid of the sinuata. Anyway, why am I even talking about this? Going back to the corazon, I thought that I was growing all of my alocasia in no drainage, but I forgot about this little setup that I had, which, I mean, I guess it kind of is no drainage because the water is not draining into anywhere. It's just all going back into the plant. But she definitely needs to be repotted because that's not cool. But a cool thing is that I really don't need to keep water levels very high on this. I just make sure it has like at least this much water at all times, and it's been really happy. So I guess, yeah, it's pretty cool that I have another alocasia that's in a different kind of setup. I think I would enjoy this setup a lot if I could recreate it on a larger scale, but really the largest that I could go with this kind of setup is a 8-inch pot, I believe. I think that's the largest that I can go, but yeah, unfortunately it's just not an option. There's not very many orchid pot options that are larger than a 10-inch. Like I would love to do like a 12 or 14-inch. Just can't find one. So if you guys have any leads, send them my way because I need one for my Thai. She needs a repot badly. Anyway, yeah, if you like a nice silvery alocasia and one that's not too finicky, I would say give this one a go. But if you want something that looks a little bit more sinister, stick around and I will show you the dragon's breath because I am still pining after that one. I need to have that one in my collection at some point. It's basically this plant's like evil stepsister in a good way. This last one is more of an honorable mention because it's not much right now. I don't even know if I've shown this or featured it at all, but this is an alocasia venusta. Grew this one from a corm, obviously. She's so teeny tiny and doesn't look like much right now, but I'm gonna insert a photo of what a venusta looks like, and I just really like it. I think it looks very similar to the sinuata in some ways, but not quite. It's got like that nice, long, sinister, narrow leaf. It has kind of a more pillowy texture, I would say, than the sinuata, less glossy, and it just looks really cool. So I actually got that corm from a friend, and she has a nice big one, and she knows that I love my scalprum, and so she was like, oh yeah, you probably would like this one because it, very, not similar, but I feel like if you like the scalprum, you'd probably like the venusta. And she was right. It's been just really slow though. I don't know if that's everyone's experience with growing a venusta from a corm, but I will say this one is particularly slower than pretty much any corm that I've ever grown. For example, I've had that for maybe 5-6 months now, and I have corms that I harvested recently that already are almost the same size as that. So I don't know if I got like a weak corm or whatever, but it's just been a slow, super slow burn, way slower than what I experienced with my cuprea, with my frydek. But I'll be patient. I really, again, not in a huge rush to have another massive alocasia, especially I'm not really sure the temperament of the venusta. I don't know if that's one that I am gonna have to keep in a greenhouse for a little while. I don't really want to have to keep it in a greenhouse, but if that's what it takes, then of course I will make space. But yeah, she's just a little tiny baby right now and not much to look at. But anyway, yeah, honorable mention. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't have experience growing it and whatever. But right now I am just growing it in fluval stratum. And I think once another 2 or 3 leaves come out of this thing, I will undome it and get it used to life in lower humidity. Those are all of my alocasia. I feel like I actually talked about that way longer for just having 6 alocasia, but now we are just gonna jump into some of the questions you guys had for me regarding alocasia. Just keep in mind that I am not, obviously you can tell I'm not like an alocasia master. Like I am very novice. I just have done what works for me. I do have, again, like I said, that alocasia care video on how I take care of my alocasia if you're interested, because I do know a lot of people struggle with alocasia, but I'd say I'm just pretty okay at growing them. Oh, the thing I want to talk about first before I get into the questions is why did I downsize a lot of my alocasia? So like I mentioned before, if they looked very similar, like if there were overlapping characteristics, I just picked the one I liked most, got rid of the other one. And then also with how finicky they can be, especially how prone they are to spider mites, I just felt with the amount of plants that I had, it just wasn't feasible for me to keep that many around. And I have noticed that my spider mite infestation has been so much better since getting rid of a lot of my alocasia. So really it just came down to keeping the ones that I really love, not wanting to have so many spider mites around. And of course, just with me being pregnant and Archie coming soon, I had to pick out the ones that I felt were going to take up a lot of my time and get rid of them if I wasn't like super in love with them. So that's really the only reasons why I got rid of them. But of course some of them croaked and died, like my bisma. I really liked my bisma, but that one didn't make it, unfortunately. So, okay, how do you size them up and keep multiple leaves? Really, the only thing I can say is that I have had the best luck growing in no drainage vessels. If you didn't know, alocasia are native to Asia, mostly I think Southeast Asia and then Eastern Australia. You can find a lot of alocasia in the Philippines. And I believe, so yeah, they're growing in rainforests, but I do think that there's a lot of alocasia that are growing along like rivers and bodies of water, so they're used to having a little bit wetter of a root system. And I just find that growing in no drainage, when you can keep a little reserve of water down at the bottom, it just keeps them happier for longer. You can avoid drought periods, you can avoid dry rot because of how thin and sensitive and delicate alocasia roots are. If you allow them to dry out completely, the chance of dry rot is so high, and that's how you can lose plants completely. So I definitely recommend keeping your alocasia on the wetter side. Not wetter side, but I recommend to not allow any drought periods go in between waterings. And if you can keep some kind of reserve at the bottom, and if you're not really keen on growing in no drainage, maybe keep a little thing of water in the whatever cover pot it's in, or if it's just in a tray, just like make sure there's always water in there so that it can take up water whenever it needs it. And fertilizing. So I do find that my alocasia can tolerate more feedings than more than any other of my plants in my collection. Sorry, my brain. Pregnancy brain has everything's jumbled in here. So watering weekly on a weekly basis. So water weekly is the saying. Right now I'm using TPS1 and I am using CalMag. And if you want to know more about my fertilization routine, you can watch my 2024 plant care reference guide, which I will link in the description. Will it grow back from a stump? Yes, it will. So you can completely behead an alocasia and it will regrow. I'm just not saying it very confidently for me, because anytime I've beheaded a alocasia, it's never grown back. It's always shot out more corms, which is great, but I've never actually successfully regrown it from its top growth point from a beheaded stump before. I know it can be done though, because I've seen plenty of people do it. I have friends that have done it. But I don't know if I just wasn't patient enough or if my conditions just weren't right. But I tried doing that with my bisma. I tried doing that with my Mycoliziana maxkowskii. I tried doing it with my, there was another alocasia that I had where it got really bad spider mites and I just wanted to like start over. And yeah, they just stayed stumps until they eventually died. It can be done. I just have not successfully done it. Do they like big pots? I'm gonna say, in my experience, no. I feel like so many of my alocasia have been able to keep more leaves on the plant when it's super root bound in its vessel. I think a lot of people will know if you have ever transplanted or repotted an alocasia, and I just think that this is a characteristic of alocasias in general because of how delicate their root systems are. When you transplant it from one pot into a larger pot, it just goes into complete shock. And I've just noticed that when I'm going from one pot size to another, if I can do one that's not so much larger, it gets stressed out a lot less than if I were to upsize a lot bigger. And like I said earlier, I definitely prefer the longer pots than the wider ones because I find that they shoot the roots downward rather than kind of spread outward. And they do the thing where, yeah, they grow down and then they grow around the pot. So a deeper vessel is something that I would recommend. And if you do struggle with keeping leaves on your alocasia, I would keep them more root bound. Not to say that you couldn't grow alocasia in large pots. You definitely can, especially if you're gonna pot more than one alocasia in the same vessel, kind of like my scalprum, because my scalprum is, I would say that one's in a deep pot, but it does have quite a big diameter as well, but I just prefer to grow in smaller, narrower pots. Best medium for long-term growth. I think all of my alocasia are in pon, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, pon for all of them. I have grown alocasia in soil before. Pretty much all of the growers that, are pumping out these alocasias are growing in like peat moss or whatever. They're growing in soil. I just find that because they like to be wetter, that pon just works best, especially if you can have a reserve of leca down at the bottom to wick water back up without keeping the pon like wet, but just keeping it a little bit more damp. And I don't know, I've had the best luck in ponds, so I just continue to go with that. Again, not to say that you can't grow it in soil. There are plenty of people who grow alocasia in soil, but I like the idea more of wet pond than I do wet soil, especially if I'm keeping it in a lower light situation. I feel like I'm giving most of my alocasia pretty good lighting conditions, but let's say that you have an alocasia growing like in your living room where it's just getting sort of like diffused light from a window. It's not really getting any direct light from the sun. Especially during times like the fall and winter, especially if you live somewhere like I do in Canada, it can get a little bit dicey with the lighting conditions and getting that balance right of moisture in the soil versus how much light it's getting and how much it's able to photosynthesize. So I just like using pon. I feel safer in pon and my plants seem to really like it. Best medium for corms. Definitely fluval stratum. So I don't really love pushing fluval stratum on this channel because I feel like it's kind of gimmicky in a way because I don't know, you can't really use it as like a long-term growing medium. Not only is it not sustainable from a financial standpoint, but it just, to me, does not make a good growing substrate for like a mature full plant. And the cost of it is just crazy. So in that respect, I don't like pushing it, but I will say that the rooting and the growth in fluval as a corm has been it's performed so much better than any other substrate I've used. I don't know what it is about fluval that corms really love, but I've just noticed that things root and grow so much faster. One thing I will say though about fluval is that it dries out so freaking fast. So if you're using it in an open container, you have to make sure to water it because your roots will dry out so fast. And if you've ever grown and rooted a corm, you know that those roots are not forgiving at all. The second they dry out, they just turn into strings and they're dead. You have to start over. So anytime I'm rooting a corm in fluval, I always make sure to dome it because if I'm not watering it or spraying it like every day or every 2 days, they just dry out so stinking fast. But fluval is definitely my substrate of choice when propagating from corm. But if you can't get your hands on fluval or you don't want to buy a bag of fluval just to propagate your corms, which is completely understandable, I would recommend pon. Next question is, how do you know when corms are ready to harvest? I actually can show you an example, so give me 1 second. I literally just picked this off my cuprea as a sacrificial lamb. All right, I got a few different corms to show you here. So this is the start of a corm on my alocasia cuprea. This is too small. Do not harvest when they look like this. It has barely produced, it's a bulb. Like, this is not going to do anything. You have to wait till it gets much bigger. So if you see it looks like this, leave it alone, don't touch it. If you plan on propagating it, it is likely not going to do anything. These ones that I harvested from my frydek, was it my frydek? Yeah. So I was repotting and these were at the very, very bottom of the pot. So I really had no choice. I had to make a choice, because if I repotted it, it wouldn't have found its way out of the substrate and it would have just died in there. So I just chose to harvest them. But these are still way too freaking small. I mean, it's like, it looks like it's a decent size, but it's been like this forever. And also the chances of this turning hollow and dying is very high. So to me, this is still too small to harvest. But I'm gonna show you a corm that is happy and healthy. And I'll show you the size difference between this one and this little guy. Sorry, not the best. So this one is about double in size. I guess I'll pull it out. I'll pull it out for you guys. Nope, I'm not. But at least you can see how big the corm is now. So compare the size of that corm to this one. It's really, really small. So you want to kind of wait until it's like nice and plump and juicy. Looking at the comparison between this and that, you just have to make sure that it's large enough, essentially. I want to say if it at least has a, what diameter is that? Like an 2-inch. I'm not good with measurements. Let's get a tape measure. If it at least has the width of, I said an inch or two, that's huge. That's massive. Like half an inch. I'd say at least half an inch big or wide is good enough to harvest. And I need to water this because the fluval is so dry, even though it's in a dome. Hello? That's how I know that things are ready to harvest, when they're about that big. I try to not harvest anything any smaller than that, because the rooting rate has been very slow and the mortality rate has been high. So I hope that answers that question. Why doesn't mine produce corms? I don't know. I don't know. I feel like some plants are just not good mothers. Like, for example, my friend Alice, who has a frydek that has been as large as mine at some point, probably even a little bit bigger. She'll go to repot and have like no corms, whereas I'll repot mine and I'll have like 18. So I think it just depends on the specimen. I don't know if there's anything that you can do specifically to induce corm growth. Thinking logically, you'd maybe assume that upping the fertilizer might make it push out corms, maybe adding more nitrogen, I don't know. But I don't really know the secret sauce to producing corms. Some of mine are like really tiny, like my alocasia corazon. That one is so tiny, and I've gotten like 4 corms from that already, whereas my cuprea that's a lot bigger has given me maybe like 3 corms in the last year. So I don't know what the solution is, unfortunately, to that. But if I had to take my best guess, I would say it's just dependent on each plant. Do you take out corms deep in the pot, or do you wait to repot? Let's put it this way. I'm not going to sacrifice the health of a plant solely to retrieve a corm. So like my cuprea, growing super well, probably can live in there for another few months. If I saw corm deep down in the pot, I am not going to uproot it just to get that corm. I would much rather let the corm die in there than try and harvest it and sacrifice the rest of my plant. I really only harvest corms when they find its way to the top, or if I'm repotting. I can't think of any situation where I have specifically uprooted a plant because there was a corm stuck in there. Even something like my frydek, where I can see there was a one time where I had this big, fat, juicy, magnificent corm that was just on the side, and I could see that it was starting to sprout, and I knew that it was gonna die because the pond is just too heavy and it was too far down. But my frydek was doing so good that I was like, okay, well, am I gonna risk transplant shock just for this one corm, or do I just sacrifice it and leave it? And I just chose to do that. I think it's up to you. It depends what your goal is with that plant, your risk level for that plant, just because repotting alocasia can be so dicey sometimes. I would say if you're not desperate to have a backup corm and you really can't wait, or it's not able to come up on its own, I would say to just leave it. But again, if you really want to propagate a corm because maybe that plant isn't doing so well and you want to back up, then I would say, yeah, maybe it's worth the sacrifice if the plant's not doing well as it is. But otherwise, I would just leave it. How do you know which way is up for the corm? This one can be kind of tricky because some corms can look really different just depending on like the stage that you harvest it. But typically, I'll insert a photo here, you will see a little tail on one end, and that is the bottom. So it shoots out of the rhizome of the alocasia and finds its way up, and so it'll produce this long, little like rat tail thing. And then you'll have the bulb, and then you'll have a tip that has like kind of a teardrop shape, and that's where your new growth is gonna come out of. So you wanna make sure that that tail is pointing downward. Sometimes it can be hard though, because if people sell corms, they're gonna remove that tail. And so just make sure that the rounded part is on the bottom and the pointed top, like this, is facing upward. Mine always rots when repotting. I feel that, I do. Alocasia repots are always my most nerve-wracking, I would say. I'm always a bit unsure about how it's gonna react. I never really feel amazing after an alocasia repot, even if it's as simple as plucking out of one vessel into another in the same exact substrate. Sometimes they know when they've been fondled and they don't like it. So I would say that if you are owning alocasia, to have like a realistic expectation of what it might be like after repotting. This may not be everyone's experience, but I feel like I can confidently say that many people have this experience when repotting alocasia. Either the plant will maybe not fully croak and die, but it will drop most of its leaves. It'll just be looking super sad for a long time. It'll rot its roots, but eventually grow new roots. The growth will just completely stop, like it'll just go dormant. So you can kind of experience a different array of things when you repot, but sometimes it's totally fine. So my recommendation is, after a repot, unless like the stem is going soft and things are going black, like it looks really bad, I would say to kind of leave it for a little bit to do its thing, because I've noticed that with alocasia repots, the chances of the old roots rotting off is kind of high, but it does push out new roots quite fast. And so you have to just assess that balance of like new roots to old roots. And sometimes trying to rescue it and get it out of there to cut off those old roots does more damage than good. You kind of have to it's kind of like a game. And that's why I really like growing in clear vessels, so that I can keep an eye on things, because in the times where I've just risked it and said, okay, even though pretty much all of the old roots are turning brown and dying, I can see the start of brand new roots, and I'm just gonna see if it bounces back on its own. And more often than not, it does. In the times where I've gone in and tried to rescue it, I've ended up with a stump. So my recommendation is give it a little while, try and pot in something clear so that you can keep an eye on it, especially if you're not super comfortable with alocasia or you're a first-time alocasia owner. and just give it some time. I will say though that if you are going to be transitioning mediums, if you're gonna go soil to something like pon or soil to leca, I would recommend cleaning off those roots as thoroughly as possible, removing any secondary roots, so those finer roots that you see growing from the primary roots. Try and keep as many primary roots as possible. Secondary roots are most likely going to just rot off and die anyway, so you can clean it up before you even get it into the new vessel. And then you can do a straight repot, but I would recommend upping the perlite a little bit if you're gonna do something like pon, because you don't want it to be super heavy. But another thing that you can do, and this one's a little bit more risky, especially if you're working with a much larger plant, but something I've done in a soil to pon conversion is chopped off all of the roots, stuck it in water, rerooted it in water, and then once the roots get to be like 5 or 6 inches long, I transfer it to pon, and that transition has been way more seamless than going straight from soil to pon. Now, if you're gonna go from something like moss to soil, that one is a little bit more straightforward. I would just recommend potting it straight away into soil. You can even chop up a little bit of the moss and mix it into that root ball to give it something familiar. But I would say that the most challenging for me in terms of alocasia has been going from moss or soil to something like pon. How to make them not so leggy. I'm gonna say light. I do think that there are some alocasia though that just love pushing long petioles, and I don't know if that's because of where they grow out in the wild. Like if they are growing somewhere that's way more understory and they need to reach for light, they've just kind of naturally evolved to have longer petioles. But I would say that like for my alocasia, I don't have any that have like intensely large or long petioles. They all kind of have a decent sized petiole in comparison to their leaf size, but I do try and keep light very close if possible. I very rarely will grow an alocasia that doesn't have like a direct light source within like a foot of it, and so I don't know if that's why I've been able to keep it less leggy. But now that I'm thinking about it, my Mycolitiana maxkowskii is one that I did grow in ambient conditions, and that one did have a lot longer petioles and it had a tendency to kind of droop. I think my only recommendation would be to keep a light source close if you can. I know that's not ideal when, especially if you're not growing in controlled environments, or you don't have a plant room, or you don't have a greenhouse or something like that. But if you can maybe keep it closer to a window, that might even help the legginess of it, because I have seen some alocasia that get super leggy and have like the tiniest little leaf on top, and I just don't think that you can really enjoy your alocasia that way. It becomes more of a nuisance or an eyesore. So if you can, maybe just get a grow light to put somewhat near it. I think that would help a lot. And then the last question is how to prevent tall stems and falling over. It's interesting because alocasias, they do tend to grow quite fast, I would say, in comparison to a lot of the other plants that we have in our collection. And so the rhizome getting longer is more of an issue. I wouldn't really recommend repotting right away if that's kind of your go-to when your stems get too long, because again, like I've been talking about, alocasia and repotting can be a dicey situation. So when I have a long, and a lot of mine do have long rhizomes coming out of the pot, what I'll do is either initially pot it deeper in the vessel. So like my frydek, I really don't want to take it out. I'm just gonna take a picture and insert it here. So you can see with my frydek, I actually potted it a lot deeper, and the level of pon used to be a lot lower, and as it's grown, I've just added more pon on top to cover more of the rhizome. So you can see now I can probably go a little bit higher. So that's one option, is when you're repotting, opt for a deeper vessel and pot it a little bit lower so that you have some clearance to add more substrate as it grows. Another thing that you can do, which I've done with my cuprea, is literally just use river rocks to support the base of it. Obviously, it's more ideal if you can get the rhizome under some kind of substrate so that you can promote root growth, promote corm growth. But if that's not an option, just using some kind of stake or rocks to keep it upright has helped a lot for me. And then another thing that you can do is just build a collar for it. So if you have any like plastic laying around, you can literally just build like an extension of the pot upward so that you don't have to repot, and that works just as well. That is it for the questions. I actually did get quite a few more questions. This fungus gnat keeps flying around the screen and it's so gross. I did get more questions, but I really only answered the ones that I felt comfortable answering confidently. There are a lot of things I don't know about alocasia. Again, I'm not the best person at growing alocasia, so I don't necessarily want to give advice that I don't feel confident in, but hopefully I managed to answer most of the questions that can hopefully diagnose some of the issues that you're having. But now we're gonna move into my wish list, which actually isn't very long. Again, I am not really looking to bring home a lot of alocasia because of the reasons that I stated before, but these are an exception. So the first one, like I mentioned, is the Alocasia heterophylla dragon's breath. This one is like the evil stepsister of the corazon, and it's just so good. It's so narrow and evil and sinister. It's got these long, sharp, pointy lobes, that sharp, pointy tip. It's way more silvery, I would say, than like a blinding silver than the corazon. It has much more contrasted venation because it's more silver. I just think it looks so evil. It just looks so evil and I love it. And I just can't imagine having like a big sinister one in my house, and it's just beautiful. So I obviously was hoping that this one was a dragon's breath, but I have actually seen the dragon's breath being sold more commonly than this one, which is kind of odd. So I know that like I will eventually be able to get my hands on it, but I think that if you like an alocasia that doesn't look sort of like your typical alocasia, and if you're into the silvery plants like I am, give her a go because she is yummy. Another one that I have on my wish list is the Alocasia watsoniana. I did have this one before, but it died. I can't remember when I had it. Was it 2022? I think it was in 2022. And I think I had this one growing in soil. I got it from a friend and it just did not do well at all. But I love this one because it's very, again, alien looking, alien-like. I like the shape of it. I like that it's kind of like turtle shaped. And it's got like a really interesting venation pattern to it. And then the contrast between that super dark, not velvety, but I can't think of the word that I'm looking for. It's not kind of like semi-velvety. Yeah, the color of that dark velvety leaf in contrast to that bright white venation that I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I think it protrudes a little bit, the venation. Like you can actually feel it on the surface. So yeah, I really love this one. I think it would be super cool to have. I don't think it's the easiest alocasia to own. I do believe this one can be a bit more finicky. I haven't really seen many hobbyists growing really big, bushy ones of these. The ones that I see being grown that are really nice and big and have held on to many leaves are the growers that are growing outdoors in tropical climates. I still would love to have it. I think I would be up for the challenge again just because I love it so much. I know my friend Alice has one, so maybe if she has a corm down the line, I would probably prefer to grow it from a corm rather than get a mature specimen and try and acclimatize it to my conditions. I think in general, just growing things from seeds, seedlings, really small size plants are just better long term so that you can introduce them to your environment, get them used to what you want them to grow in. And even though, you know, it would be great to acquire like a nice big one already, I think long term with how finicky I know alocasias can be, I think I would much rather grow this from a corm. And then the last alocasia on my wish list is the Alocasia longiloba narrow SP Borneo. This one kind of reminds me, so I've been seeing different photos of them, and I'm gonna insert the one that I'm referencing, and hopefully this is the right ID for it. So it reminds me a lot of the Alocasia sanderiana, which I will overlay over me so that you can compare the two. I do like the sanderiana. I think that would be a nice second best to the Longilobanero. But I just really, really love the shape of this one. It's a little bit more dramatic than the sanderiana. The sanderiana is a little bit like sillier and quirkier and cuter in a way, whereas this one is just, yeah, it's more of like a statement. I just have an affinity for plants with really long lobes. That's why I love the Billy so much. I just find it to be such a cute feature of a plant. And I would love to own this one. It's kind of like if a sanderiana and like a poly had a baby, kind of. I do like the poly, but not enough to own it myself. But I really, 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 really like this plant. I have never seen it offered for sale in a purge or at like plant shops, both in the US and in Canada. I don't know if that's something that I would have to get imported like from the Philippines or something, but I would love to add this one to my collection. So if you like a sinister looking plant, but something that's a little bit more friendly, I think this is a really good one. And that is going to wrap it up for my alocasia video. I am going to insert some recommendations of alocasia that I got from you guys. I wanted to keep this video a little bit on the shorter side, so I'm not going to go through that whole list and insert photos, but I will just include a list in the description. And if you have been on the hunt for a new alocasia, maybe some of these might tickle your fancy. But yeah, that's gonna be it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Hope maybe you found another wishlist alocasia to add to your collection. If there's any that I didn't talk about in this video or that is not on the list included in the description, please send it my way. Even if it's not something that I want to add to my collection, I just really like learning about new alocasia. It's a nice little break from the heavy anthurium and philodendron content that is just constantly being flooded on socials. I just feel like alocasia don't get enough love, I feel. But anywho, that's gonna be it for me. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.